So welcome again to Father TED Talks. Today's topic, evolution. Does the church believe in it? Is it against it? Is it for it? We'll explore it today. So our question today about evolution comes from our Gmail account, and the question reads as thus. It says, evolution, how does the church explain this? Man was created in God's image and woman from his rib. I have heard things like, you can't take the Bible literally, as the most popular response, but it doesn't quite cut it for me. Or, God is in spirit only. It's kind of like picking and choosing what to take literally. And if man was created in the image of God, then how do we explain evolution? Has the church addressed this? Does it even believe in evolution? I think I am searching for an answer that is impossible. Science is based on fact, and whenever I ask for an answer, it's never scientific or proven. It's just based on faith, not so much fact. Then I get discouraged and just come to the conclusion that religion and science just don't mesh. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for the question, and I'm going to try to address some of the points in your question, try to address it as straightforward as possible as it is to answer this question in a 10-minute video. So one of the first points that you mentioned in your question was about the term fact. So you said that, science is about fact, and religion is about faith. First of all, a little bit about fact. When we say facts, facts really are things that we can observe, things we can prove, things that our senses can see. And so we can gather different facts from life, we can gather different facts from different events. And really, when we talk about the Bible, or when we talk about faith in general, are we really talking about facts? And is science really talking about facts? I think we have to be really clear that there's a difference between fact, as in just things that we can observe, information that we can take in, and the understanding of those facts, or the interpretation of those facts. And what do I mean by this? Even in science, when a scientist sets up an experiment, for example, and he has a hypothesis, and he wants to test that hypothesis, he will set up an experiment to be able to test it, and he will gather data from that particular experiment, and he will take that data, the facts, and he will interpret it in a way that is will help him understand whether his hypothesis is true or not. But in order to kind of understand all the information that comes and all the data that comes from the experiment, he needs to synthesize that in his mind. He needs to put that together in a way that is understandable. Now, this is not manipulation of facts or of data, but rather of the pulling together of different things so that our minds can make sense of them. In the same way, when we talk about religion or when we talk about the Bible, when we speak about facts or we speak about things that happen in the Bible, there are those things. For example, we know that Jesus lived, he existed, and that he did certain things. For example, he performed miracles, that he lived in Nazareth when he was a child, that he, traveled throughout Judea for 3 years of his life, from 30 years old to 33, that he was put on trial by the Jews and the Romans, that he was crucified. So we have specific facts about his life, but what those facts actually mean for us and what they actually mean from a spiritual point of view, that is where faith comes in. Like, how do we synthesize those facts in our minds, and how do we kind of, put all that stuff together, and what does it mean for us? So meaning and facts are two different things, right? In the same way that when we speak about evolution, which is the topic of your question, when we speak about Darwin, for example, we see, and anybody who reads Darwin will know that Darwin observes certain things, right? He comes up with certain facts from certain experiments and certain observations that he makes in different species during his lifetime, and he took that information and he postulated that there is a certain evolution, there's a certain change within species from the beginning of time to now. And this is the postulation that there are different types of evolution that happen both over small periods of time and also large periods of time. For example, that there is a thing called microevolution, which is small changes over long periods of time, and also there is macroevolution, which is huge changes over long periods of times, right? So all this kind of evidence, all this kind of data that Darwin was able to gather, he synthesized into his theory of evolution. So it's important to remember that science is more concerned about facts and the understanding of those facts. How do things happen in this world? Why do things work the way they work? And basically, that's really what scientists are doing, and this is why scientific models are always changing. Scientific, theories are changing constantly, like evolution, which is one of the more cohesive and coherent theories that we have of the way species have evolved on this planet in this life, in the material life. This is the theory that we're following right now. There are other theories as well that are maybe not as well received, but science is constantly looking for the facts, looking for what it can prove. Now, when we switch over to religion, we are not switching over to something that is contrary to science. It is not contrary to truth or contrary to facts. Rather, when we speak about, for example, the Bible, which is what everybody quotes and what everybody reads, and usually what everybody believes to be contrary to science, we see that there is something very different happening there as a book. So we have to remember that the Bible is not is neither a scientific book, nor is it written as a historical chronicle, as some people would think. Now, there is a very, very popular way of reading the Bible amongst Protestants, and especially evangelical Protestants, which is a very literal way of reading the Bible, which basically means reread the Bible like it is a historical book. It is a chronicle. It is a scientific, a compendium, I guess you could say, of the facts. On the other side, we have another extreme way of reading the Bible, which is the mythical way, which some people believe that, the Bible is all myth, that there are no historical facts in it, that there are no actual historical events that are happening there, but rather that it is simply just a moralistic book to teach us about how to be good people. And so there are these two extremes. There are the people who read the Bible completely literally, and there are the people who read the Bible in a completely metaphorical way. Now, the question is, how do the Orthodox read the Bible, and how do they compare what the Bible says about mankind, about the history of mankind, and how does that compare to science, and not only the theory of evolution, but any type of scientific theory? And so this is the question that we really have to get at. So one of the basic and fundamental problems with the idea that there is a battle happening between science and religion is that we as Orthodox Christians and Christians in general don't know how to read the Bible. We think that the Bible is this historical chronicle of what happened. And it's really not. It is based on certain historical events that are happening, but the Bible is what is called interpretive history. Now, what is interpretive history? It is basically written from the point of view of people who have experienced biblical events or historical events, facts, but they are already interpreting them in the light of divine revelation, which basically means that these are spiritual people who are seeing things happen in their lives, or they're seeing events, and they are interpreting them in a religious way. They are basically expressing to us not necessarily just what is happening, but why it is happening. What is the meaning behind the event that is happening? So when you have stories that are written in that way, we see that the historicity or the historical accuracy of things take a back seat to the spiritual, eternal message that comes forward.
Now, right away, scientists would say, or even historians would say, well, no, you can't let the historical, facts take a back seat to your interpretation. But this is where we come back to the idea that science and religion are doing two very different things. They are following two very different methodologies, and they're asking very different questions. And so to compare the two is really unfair. To try to stick the Bible or shoehorn it somehow into, the scientific understanding of how history evolves, or on the other hand, to take science and to try to shove it, somehow in between the different dogmatic truths that we hold dear, is really doing a disservice to both science and religion, because they are working with two different methodologies, and they are taking different types of evidence into account.
So I'll give you an example of why this is true, because I know some Orthodox Christians who may be listening to this video, when it airs, they might, kind of have a little bit of a freak out, because a lot of us have been trained or have learned how to read the Bible like evangelical Protestants do. We read it as if it is word for word, historically and scientifically accurate. But I'll prove to you right now why it is not, and why we have to begin to learn and to look at it in a very different way. If we open Genesis, okay, and we read Genesis 1, which is the creation account, we will see that there is a certain order of the way things are, that God, first creates the universe. Well, he has the void and creates the heavens, and he creates the earth and the water and the land, and there's a certain process by which he creates everything. And at the end, he creates man, who is the pinnacle of creation. He is the last creation. If you go to Genesis 2, the second chapter, there is yet again a description of creation which contradicts Genesis 1. And in that depiction of creation, man is not the last creation of God, because in that depiction, the animals are created after man, and Adam names them. So which one is correct? In the same book of Genesis, in the Holy Bible, we have contrary historical facts or historical assumptions happening, and so that's a problem. I'll give you another example. When we have the story of the first children of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and we know the story that Cain kills his brother Abel out of jealousy. And the story says that after God questions Cain and finds out that he has committed this murder, that he marks Cain with some kind of mark on his body that marks him as a murderer, and that Cain goes away to a faraway land where he finds a wife and has children. Where did he find a wife and children if there are no other human beings on the earth? If we read the Bible from a scientific, factual point of view, if you read it that way, then technically there should only be Adam and Eve and Cain left, only 3 people on the earth. Where would Cain find another wife? So we see that, even the Bible itself does not take itself seriously when it comes to science, because it is not doing that. It is not trying to express scientific facts, but rather it is attempting to express eternal truths about our existence, who we are in relation to God. Okay? So when we look at the story of Adam and Eve, it is really irrelevant whether it was 2 people running around in a garden. Okay, what it's trying to say about who we are as human beings, how we are born into the world innocent, and how we do not have an experience of sin, but then eventually we do sin and we turn away from God, and that we suffer from that sin. If we take those elements of the story and we apply them to every one of our lives, we will see that it is really the story of every single one of us. And it really is true, eternally true. And this is why when we say the Bible is true, we mean it in the most deepest and spiritual and profound way, that it is true. And all the stories from the Bible say these things. Now, this doesn't mean that all the stories of the Bible are fables or myths, but rather that they are based on historical facts that are interpreted. That is very, very different from what science is doing. And this is why Orthodox Christianity really should not have any problem with the theory of evolution. It doesn't mean that we accept it wholesale, because we are not in the business of really trying to figure out if, the theory of evolution is compatible with us or not, because really it's irrelevant. The idea that we have evolved from single-cell organisms, or from proteins turning into single-cell organisms, turning into animals, and moving on until we get to now, getting to the point where we are human beings that can actually contemplate and have a relationship with God, is really not contradictory to what we believe as Orthodox Christians. Now, I know some Orthodox Christians and some priests and maybe bishops will disagree with me what I'm saying here, but I will give one final example as to why this type of paradox can exist within the world, with this idea that we are Orthodox Christians that read the Bible and take truths from it, but we can also not be threatened by science. When we look at the growth of a baby in the womb, we see that, we understand how children come into being. We understand the fertilization of an egg. We understand the mitosis, the cell mitosis that happen, the growth of an egg becoming a zygote, becoming a fetus, growing to become a full human being, and then being birthed into this world. We see that there is, in the growth of a child within the mother's womb, the microcosm of the growth of humanity, that a child, when it is only a few cells, is not yet at the point where it can contemplate God. It doesn't even have a brain yet, right? It has a soul, we believe. It is still a creation of God, but it is not at the point where it can fully understand God or pray or have any kind of relationship in that sense, right? Except for the most basic relationship that God has given it a soul. But as the child grows, it begins to develop, it builds a brain, a nervous system, and then even when the child comes out, it still is not at the point to fully comprehend anything about God. And as it grows and builds its personality, it comes into maturity. And then we have what we call, functioning adults with a cultivated spiritual life, and then we have saints at the end of someone's life, as we can see, or we hope that we have saints. And so we see that just because a child begins on a very basic level in a mother's womb, there is a type of microcosm of evolution that is happening there. Why can we not apply that concept to the whole of mankind? If we look at mankind as a whole, as one human being, if we take all of us from the beginning of history till the end, and we see it as one human being, why would we be so afraid of understanding or accepting that earlier versions of our species were more simplified or were from other species than we grew into what we are today? Why does that necessarily contradict or negate the notion of God, or negate the understanding of God? Of course, these are my personal thoughts. This is not necessarily, the official position of the Orthodox Church, because the Orthodox Church does not have an official position on evolution, because it doesn't need to have official position on evolution, because we are not so much interested in what or how we got here biologically, but rather that we are here now, and how do we perceive the spiritual world, and how do we understand our Creator. And so this is, I guess, it's not a cop-out. I'm not trying to kind of sidestep the evolution issue. What I'm trying to say is that science and religion, they can work hand in hand, because they are doing different things. They are not competing with one another. They are not, or they shouldn't be competing with one another, trying to kind of, convince people one way or the other, but rather that they are two sides of the same coin. That one kind of gives us the, how things work, how things come into being from a biological, from a scientific, from a physical point of view, and the other side gives us the why, the meaning behind it, the interpretation of everything that we are, and how we become that which God wants us to be. And so this is why I have really no problem with it. And really the fathers of the church, if we look at the history of the church, didn't really have a problem with science. We never had the Inquisition in the East. We never had a problem with scientists in the East. We never burned people at the stake in the East for teaching about science, but rather it was something that was embraced, and it wasn't something that was considered a threat to the church. And so I think that the Orthodox point of view is one of that we as human beings are created in the image and likeness of God. The way we read the Bible is that we look for the eternal truths that apply to us today, instead of trying to make it compatible with different theories of how biology and biological living beings come into being. And we shouldn't be afraid about these theories. And again, on a final note, I will say that these theories are just theories. They may be the best theories that we have today, but as science always says, theories are always being reworked, and they're always being re-examined, and there might be some things that we will know in the future that we do not know right now, or there might be more questions that come up in the future that we never anticipated. That's the beauty of science, and that is also the conundrum of science, that we are always constantly trying to describe and to explain and to observe things, but it is only one-sided. It only looks at one thing, whereas the Orthodox faith looks at the person in its totality, both the physical and the spiritual. This is at least the best answer that I can give you right now. I hope that it's good enough. I know it might not be good enough, but it's the best that I can do, at least from my limited knowledge. And maybe we can revisit this again in the future. But for now, may God bless you. Keep asking these difficult questions. Go back and read the Bible. Go back and read Darwin, because a lot of people don't actually read Darwin. They just read, Facebook posts or, internet posts about Darwin, but they don't actually read what he actually said. And look at the comparisons, and look at even some of the theories that exist even in physics, like the Big Bang, and look at the order of the way the world comes into being in the Big Bang theory, and then look at creation and see if there are any similarities, because I think you will find some very interesting similarities there as well. But again, we have to remember that there is a big difference between what the Bible is doing and what science is doing. And that doesn't mean that they are contradictory. It just means that they're looking for different things. And so we have to ask the right types of questions. And I think the wrong question is evolution against the church, or is the church against evolution? I don't think that's even the right question. I think we're not even talking about the same thing. We're comparing apples and oranges. And I think we have to get comfortable with that. We have to get comfortable with the fact that not everything will always make sense, but also that we don't always have all the answers, both scientifically, but even spiritually, we don't always have the answers. And so this is why we can constantly pray, we constantly grow in our faith, we constantly test our theories scientifically, so that we can learn more and more about the beauty of God's creation. Thank you for asking your questions. God bless you. This is Father Ted from Fr.TEDTalks. you.